Hello everybody, welcome to this webinar on demystifying primary music. I am Dr Liz Stafford and I'm author of the Primary Music Leaders Handbook. You see a little picture of there on your screen, and I'm presenting today on behalf of Collins Music. It would be great to start off with you maybe popping something in the chat about who you are and where you're from so we can see who we've got with us today. You'll also see that there's a Q&A function that you can use, so if you've got questions as we go through today, if you can pop those in the Q&A, if you can try and remember questions in Q&A and everything else in chat, that will just help me to be able to find the things that I need. And I'm going to be presenting to you on this topic. I will keep an eye on the chat and the Q&A as we go through, just in case there are comments that I need to respond to in the moment. But if not, I will then at the end cover everybody's questions off through that. I can already see that people are posting in the chat. Well done, Donna from Delta Academies Trust. Thank you very much for starting us off. It's good to see that we can follow instructions today. So, where has this idea come from, demystifying primary music? It's something we've been talking about a little bit with the team at Collins Music just recently, because there's been all sorts of stuff thrown at music in the last 2 to 3 years, which has compounded a problem that we've always had, which is people have felt that music is this like weird special thing that not everybody knows how to do, and you have to be some kind of, you know, crazy talented Beethoven-esque genius to be able to access it properly. And I don't think that's true. I actually don't think music is a specialist subject, in that I don't think that it can only be taught by somebody who has been to university or conservatoire and is, you know, a professional standard musician. I think that anyone can and should do music, and that applies to teachers as well as to pupils. So if you are here, or if you're here on behalf of colleagues who feel that you are not specialist in music, that shouldn't be a barrier to you, really. Often when I talk to primary colleagues about the idea of teaching music, I would say the first thing that people say, or the thing that people say most often to me, is I can't teach music because I can't read music. But actually, it's really important to understand that those are separate concepts. It's perfectly possible to be musical without reading music, and vice versa as well. There are plenty of people who could read music, but, you know, their compositions and their performances leave a lot to be desired. And often when you say things like that, some people will say, yes, but, you know, the goal should be that we can read music. So Paul McCartney doesn't read music, and he's written a symphony. There are plenty of professional musicians who don't read music. It's only really a thing in classical music where it's kind of something that you have to do. It's absolutely, you know, essential, really, if you're going to be a classical musician, that you can read music, because of the way the classical music sector is structured and because of the need to be able to sight read and all those kind of things. But if you are a pop musician or a folk musician, if you are in music production, there is no requirements, there is no need for you to read music. I'm not saying that reading music is a bad thing per se, but I'm saying it's not the be all and end all. And certainly if you're a primary teacher, just because you don't read music doesn't mean you can't teach it. Music reading is a tiny, tiny part of just one little bit of the Key Stage 2 curriculum. All of the other stuff you can do without ever understanding what a crotchet or a quaver is. And generally speaking, I would say at primary level, confidence from our teachers and understanding the material you are teaching is way more important than having a high level of personal musical skill. I feel quite strongly actually that it's easier to teach someone who is a non-specialist but already a teacher to teach music than it is to teach a specialist musician how to teach with no teaching experience, if that makes sense. Often people who are really highly accomplished musicians may have started their musical journey when they were 4, 5, 6, and they can't remember what it was like to not understand basic concepts like pulse and pitch and notation reading and all of those things. Whereas if you are somebody who hasn't been highly trained in music, you're actually at an advantage, really, because you know what it feels like to not be quite sure about things. So you learn very quickly how to explain those things in an accessible way so that children will understand. And of course, you have experience of teaching, and teaching is harder than music. I promise it's true. So if you have natural teaching ability, if you know how to get the best out of your pupils, if you're great at behavior management, if you have an engaging personality, all these things that teachers have, you are onto a winner. And all you need to do is just slightly be ahead of the children in your curriculum and know how to explain that to them to teach fantastic lessons. Now, let's get down to documents. We're going to do quite a bit today talking about different documents. I'm hoping that I'm not going to bore you to tears, because some of them are not the most exciting things you will ever have read. I have distilled them into just a few slides per document so that you don't have to go through the pain that I did of reading all of this educational jargon and all these different documents. The thing to remember is there hasn't been a statutory document released for music since the 2014 national curriculum. That's assuming we are in England. Obviously, curriculum for Wales has come out fairly recently, so you are dealing with a new curriculum if you've joined us from Wales today. But all of the other stuff that's been thrown in front of us, national plans for both countries, England and Wales, the model music curriculum, the Ofsted music subject research review, all of that stuff is non-statutory. So actually, while it's obviously beneficial to us to at least have heard of them and know what's in them, we don't actually have to do any of the things that they say. So if that is in your school the barrier to teaching music, then we don't need to let it be. We can just go straight back to the national curriculum. This is what we're meant to be doing. This is how we're going to approach it. So the key documents that you need to know about that we're going to talk about today are the national curriculum or the national curricula, because we may have people joining us from obviously different areas today. Music Development Matters, which is an early years document, the Model Music Curriculum, which is England specific, the Ofsted Music Subject Research Review, which again, is from the English Inspectorate, but the information in it is useful in other territories and countries, and the National Plan for Music Education, or the National Plans for Music Education, because obviously we have one in Wales as well as in England. So starting with the national curriculum, this is the only statutory requirement for music in primary schools. So this is the only thing you really, really need to worry about. And the version in England certainly has end of key stage expectations, but it doesn't have levels or year group breakdowns or any other kind of benchmarks provided. And it includes performing, which is singing tuned and untuned instruments, composing and improvising, listening, including live and recorded music. It looks at music notation, key stage 2 only, and it looks at music history for key stage 2 only. Obviously, that's the curriculum we're using in England and in the majority of international, British international schools across the world. You may be using the Welsh curriculum or the Scottish curriculum. There is a blog that I've written to accompany this webinar, which will be released, I'm going to say shortly, because I haven't checked on when that will be available. And we talk a little bit about those other curricula as well in there. But the main thing to recognise is that wherever you are, whatever your national curriculum is, whether it's the national curriculum for China, whether it's the national curriculum for England or Wales or Scotland or Jersey or Guernsey, because those are slightly different as well, you just have to make sure that you are delivering what it says. So for our colleagues in England, that is making sure that we are performing, as it says on the screen, with singing, tuned and untuned instruments, having opportunities to compose and improvise, making sure that we are listening to music, both in live and recorded context. And then when we get to Key Stage 2, doing something about music notation and the history of music. So actually, although music might seem a little bit scary and a little bit complicated, a little bit specialist, when you look at it broken down like that, it's quite simple. I know that's easy for me to say because I am a specialist, but really there isn't a massive load of information that you need to digest with this curriculum. It really is just those key areas that you need to cover. So Music Development Matters is some guidance produced by an early years music expert called Nicola Burke, very active on Twitter, so you can go and have a look, and lots of discussions around early years with those kind of networks on Twitter. And the idea of it is to supplement and extend the wider EYFS Development Matters guidelines that we have. And it's a really, really useful document. It gives you a fantastically clear account of what you should look for in terms of musical development from birth all the way to 5 years, which covers these skills, so hearing and listening, vocalizing and singing, moving and dancing, and exploring and playing. And when you start to think about those areas, you can see how actually that would then feed into, as children get older, a national curriculum where they have to do listening and they have to do performing, including singing and playing, and they have to be creative. This particular document also has some free supporting materials available with it, so it really is a great document. It's completely free. You can just download it from the internet. They ran out of printed copies, I believe, quite quickly, but you can still download a PDF version. If I had been organised, I could have put a link to that in the chat, but maybe my colleague Cassie might dig around and find out where the link to that is and might pop it into the chat before the end of this session so that you can find it. If not, Google Music Development Matters and you will find it quite easily. Okay, so moving on to the model music curriculum. This document, I think this is the scariest of all the things that we've seen in music education ever. No, that's probably not true. But certainly in recent years, this document is the thing I think that's caused the most trouble, perhaps, because it is almost totally different from what most schools' kind of reality is in England. Again, the model music curriculum is a non-statutory document. It only applies to the English national curriculum anyway. And because it's non-statutory, you can ignore it if you choose to do so. It was meant to be a model of how the national curriculum can be delivered. One of the things that people were concerned about in terms of our national curriculum in England was that it fits on 2 sides of A4 for primary schools, and that if you're a non-specialist, it doesn't really help you at all understand how to teach year by year. So the model music curriculum was designed to break the curriculum down and to provide a model of this is how you would deliver the national curriculum on a year by year basis from year 1 through to year 6, and there's obviously secondary as well. But it was very poorly received when it came out in certain quarters. People objected to even the very idea of it at the start. There was lack of transparency around the experts who were chosen to contribute to the curriculum. We still don't officially know who the people were, even who actually wrote it. So it was, I mean, it was going to have to be amazing to get over those hurdles in the first place. And unfortunately, it isn't amazing. It's not required or endorsed by Ofsted. And I think that's really important to say, because a lot of people, when this is from the DFE, this is what they expect us to do. This is what Ofsted are looking for. And Ofsted were really, really quick to come straight out and say, this isn't what we're looking for. Great if you want to use it, but if you want to use something else, that's absolutely fine. And then they gave a little helpful list of things that they would like to see in your curriculum. So it absolutely isn't mandatory. Ofsted are not looking for it. If it works for you, you can use it. If it doesn't work for you, you don't need to use it. One of the things that is helpful, I think, about this document, or well, is it helpful? It's helpful in some respects, but not in others, is that it says that an hour a week of music should be delivered at primary level, which is helpful because I think often I get asked that question, you know, how long should we be spending on music? So it's helpful in that sense that it's kind of given us a concrete idea of how to teach, how long to teach music for. But when you count up all the curriculum subjects that you have to teach, you will quickly discover that there isn't room in the curriculum for all of them to be given an hour. So you're going to have to make the decision, if you are following the model music curriculum, which remember is non-statutory, as to whether you are going to prioritise music over other subjects, and you're going to give music that hour-long session per week, or 2 shorter sessions split into half hours maybe, or if you're going to ignore that advice. And the way this model music curriculum is structured is that it has key areas of learning. So it has singing, which is separate from, in Key Stage 1, what they call musicianship, and in Key Stage 2 and 3, they call it performing. So what was under in the national curriculum, performing, singing and playing instruments, is now separated into these 2 different areas. And there's very much a focus in the singing aspect on Kadai pedagogy. If you're not familiar with Kadai pedagogy, it is a methodology for teaching music and singing and kind of oral learning and music notation reading, which is based around the hand signs, which you may have seen people doing, do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, ti, do. It's widespread in its use across Europe. It's used quite a lot in Australia as well. It's not something that is used consistently here. It's not like a government approved approach. That's what I'm trying to say. And it's an interesting thing to have been put into this document, because it's not something that is massively mainstream in this country. And in order to be able to teach in a Kadai fashion, you need to have Kadai training. And that has not been provided as part of the model music curriculum. So that's something schools, if they want to go down the model music curriculum route, are going to have to sort themselves. There's been no suggestion of where the budget might be found for them, which organisations you would go to get that training, where you would find the repertoire, So that's an interesting decision that that was included. The musicianship and performing strands, very much, musicianship less so, performing at Key Stage 2 definitely, focus on instrumental technique and focus on notation reading. It's very much like a graded exams approach to using instruments in the classroom, which for some schools may work. And certainly schools who are having a lot of input for things like whole class instrumental teaching programs will find that easier to deliver. But it doesn't really, I think, capture the specialities maybe, or the uniqueness of using classroom-based instruments in a non-specialist delivery, if that makes sense. When we use instruments in a primary classroom, it's not just about learning to play one note and then learning to play another note and then learning to play another note and gradually sort of getting more complex. It's much more about exploration. It's more about linking to creative work, developing motor skill, which I'm not saying you can't do through this structure, but a lot of the stuff that is there in the performing strand, I would say, and I'm trying to be polite, is not pedagogically sound in terms of curriculum. If you were going to use it, as I say, in a whole class context or in a small group or one-to-one, it would work absolutely fine. The composing strand, again, is a little bit of a red herring in this document, because its focus is very much on developing notation writing. So whereas the performing aspect is all about instrumental technique and reading notation, the composing is about writing your music down. And that is kind of contrary to about 50, 60 years of work right the way across certainly the Western world, where we have viewed composing in education's function as being an opportunity to explore how music works. So by composing and improvising, we understand how dynamics work, how texture works, how structure works. This in the modern music curriculum is not that. What is in the composing is here are these parameters. You must compose within these parameters, because then that's easy to write down. We start by writing a certain number of notes in C major, then we go to the next key signature that's the next easiest, and so on and so on. So again, it's not really in the spirit of what we know to be, the generally accepted pedagogy for composition teaching. And it also doesn't really reflect what's in the national curriculum, because the national curriculum says things like experimenting and creating and combining sounds and using the interrelated dimensions of music. So a little bit of a disconnect there. And then the final thing about this curriculum is, I think it's really interesting, because I think the listening aspect of it is both the best and the worst aspect of this document, in that people got really excited because there is a huge repertoire list in the model music curriculum, and people went, oh, this is great, and I can make QR codes so kids can scan them and they can listen to the music, and we could do composer of the week, we could do this, that and the other. And I totally understand why, because people want to kind of cling to content, and you know, anything that makes it easier and saves you time. Totally get it. However, the approach to listening in the modern music curriculum is just content. It's just, here are some pieces you could listen to. There is nothing about how to listen, how to develop the skill of listening, what to listen out for in those pieces. And so I worry that some schools may adopt this approach and will go, great, so we just listen to these pieces of music and that's it, we've done the listening. We don't need to do anything with it, we just need to listen to the music and appreciate the music, and that's it. So I don't know whether you can tell that I'm not a big fan of the model music curriculum. I don't think it's a heinous crime against humanity, but I also think it's got, you know, massive pedagogical holes in it. And it's a real shame that it didn't, you know, come out for feedback and for consultation with real teachers before it was published, in all honesty. So if you are in a situation where you are thinking about using the model music curriculum, just bear in mind, A, you don't have to, B, Ofsted are not looking for it, and C, you're going to have to do quite a lot of work to make this pedagogically sound and to make it work in your particular context. Oh, right. Music Subject Research Review, which was published by Ofsted last year. So this is an interesting document as well, because it's not actually what it says it is. It says it's a research review, and anybody who's been through an academic course, which is most of us as teachers, I suppose, will know that when you do a literature review or a research review, what you have to do is look at all the available data and research and then draw conclusions from that. And what Ofsted have done is picked the research that they agree with and presented that as their research review. So what it is a position paper. It's them saying, this is what we believe about music, which actually is useful. If you are in a school based in England, this is useful, because now you know what Ofsted are expecting to see. But if you are looking at it from the point of view of, this is going to tell me, you know, the definitive information about how music education works, it is not useful, because they have cherry picked the information that they want to use themselves. What's another interesting feature of it, I think, is that it casts doubt on the wider benefits of music. We are often hearing people say music helps literacy and numeracy and social skills and all this kind of stuff. And actually, even Ofsted, in their inspection framework, talk about transferable skills, wanting to see transferable skills across the curriculum, but this document contradicts that, and it says actually there's no evidence, or, you know, the evidence is limited, or the jury is out on whether it really does have all these extra benefits. But music should be learned for music's sake. You learn music to get better at music, and that is as good a reason as anything to do it. So I think that's actually really powerful, and I'm really glad that Ofsted said that in this document, because I think when we justify music in other terms, we run the risk of people going, okay, but why don't we just do more literacy or more numeracy? If music's only there to help with those things, why do we bother with it? Why don't we just do those things? So I'm pleased with that. I'm pleased to see that there. It also quite strongly reminds academies and free schools that music is part of a broad and balanced curriculum, because again, here in England, academies and free schools don't have to follow the national curriculum. They just have to have a curriculum that is broad and balanced. So really good to see them reiterating that whatever type of school you are, they're expecting to see music. And also it reiterates that music should not be on a carousel or on rotation, and should be taught all the way from primary right up to the end of year 9. So from that point of view, there's some really useful, I would say, advocacy tools within this document so that you can go to your head teacher or your SLT and say, okay, you know, this is what Ofsted are looking for, this is what their suggestions are, so this is what I would like to do in my school. Having said that, it's a really long document. So, you know, prepare yourself before you read it, and, you know, just take a breath, take some notes, maybe split it into 2 sessions, because it's quite a lot of information to encounter in that. And some of the things that are in this document are ideas for structuring your curriculum and for kind of hanging your assessment processes on, which again are interesting to consider and are things that you may want to work into the way you do things at your school. So Ofsted suggests that your music curriculum really should be underpinned by what they call these interrelated pillars of music education: technical, constructive, and expressive. So under the technical pillar, you are working towards competence in controlling sound and use of a communication system. By communication system, they mean music notation. Under the constructive one, you are developing your knowledge of the interrelated dimensions of music and the components of composition. And under the expressive one, you're looking at musical quality, creativity, and knowledge of musical meaning across the world and time, which it would be tempting to sort of map against performing, composing, and listening activities, but it's a little bit more nuanced than that. In the Ofsted are saying that we can do, those pillars are on the vertical, and our skills of performing, composing, improvising, listening are on the horizontal, which you can see on this diagram here, which is taken directly from that Ofsted report. So a nice sort of grid thing. I was just trying to work out how to get my fingers to do that. A griddy thing is happening here. So when you're working on that technical pillar, you will be doing performing, composing, and listening, because you are developing your motor skills so that you can play and sing with accuracy and confidence, but also so that you can explore and produce sound. Development of the inner ear, I have a little bit of an issue with this. I don't think they really meant that. I think they meant development of oral skills, because development of the inner ear isn't a thing. In constructive, we're talking about the use of musical elements in performance and in composition, and also recognizing them when we hear them across listening. And then the expressive pillar here, being more expressive in our performances, being more sophisticated and creative in our musical outcomes. And this, I say this pillar here is the one that I'm least comfortable with, because in the performing bit, as you can see, increasing expression in performance, great, but then understanding of musical context and provenance, I don't necessarily agree that understanding where the music comes from makes you more expressive. Sometimes it might do, to know the background of the music, sometimes that might help you, but not all the time. I don't think those two things rely on each other, so I'm a little bit kind of on the fence about that. I'm also on the fence about the idea of increasing sophistication and creativity in musical outcomes for composition, because I think actually you don't necessarily have to have increasing sophistication for your composition to sound better. It can actually be quite simple, but you can use simple devices to expressive effect. So again, I'm a little bit on the fence there. And then the listening one, to be honest, it just feels a little bit desperate. It felt like they just needed to put something in that box. So increasing knowledge of musical pieces, genres, and cultures. Nobody's arguing that that isn't a good thing, but I don't think that really has anything to do with developing you as an expressive artist necessarily. It's useful to learn about different cultures and genres, and you can definitely feed that back into what you're doing, but it's not, you know, the two things don't necessarily feed into each other to the point where you couldn't break them up. That's what I'm trying to say. The other thing to be aware of in this Ofsted music subject research review, which I always wonder if I've got in the right order, are these kind of features of high quality music. We hear the phrase high quality bandied about all the time now. It's in this document, it's in the National Plan for Music Education. It's one of those things that when you think about it, it means absolutely nothing. Nobody is going to say, my aim is to do music that is low quality in my school. That's what I'm aiming for. Everybody's aiming for high quality, and therefore high quality just becomes normal, surely. But Ofsted certainly think that high quality means that you will have curriculum content that might reasonably be mastered in the time available, remembering that sometimes less is more. There's quite a few little riffs in this document about how schools try and pack too much into the curriculum, and about how music should be learned in sort of smaller increments, and how we should be doing fewer topics, but at more level of depth. So that's what that's all about. And again, that's useful to know, I think, because sometimes we feel like we have to stuff our curriculum full and we have to do as many different styles of music as we can. But having this document from Ofsted and knowing that part of their position is music, you need to slim down, you need to do fewer things better, is useful. Which leads into that idea of plentiful opportunities for pupils to return to and consolidate their short-term learning, and repetition of key curricular content with a gradual introduction of new ideas, methods and concepts. All of this is what we know as the idea of a spiral curriculum, just going round and round and round, gradually getting to greater levels of depth. Okay, so National Plan for Music Education, the English version we're going to talk about now. Again, the blog references the Welsh one as well. And this plan here runs from, we think, next autumn to 2030. We've been told that all of the music hubs who currently deliver the current plan have all got to rebid for their jobs, and the market is open to new entrants. And we've been told we will not hear anything about how that process will work until next year. So I have my doubts as to whether it will really start in autumn 2023, in all honesty. If they've got to find, another 100 organisations, they've all got to rebid and they've got to get in position ready, I'm not convinced. But that's what we're working on, autumn 23 to 2030, and funding has been agreed for some of that time, but not all of it. And the goals of the national plan are things that you really can't argue with, I would say. And unlike the model music curriculum, when that came out, people had all kinds of issues with it. This plan has been received really well. The way it's been enacted, and the fact that we don't know what's happening, and we don't know how long the funding is going to last, and we don't know who's going to be in charge of it, is a whole other issue. But the actual content of the plan, most people seem really happy with. And I think, again, probably because of these goals, because nobody's going to argue that we want all children to receive a high quality music education in early years and schools, or that we want to work in partnership and keep children and young people's needs and interests at our heart, and that we want all children to be able to progress, including where relevant, professionally. And it's a really long document, but the good news for schools is basically just chapter 1 is the one that you need to worry about. So if you haven't got much time, just read that bit, which tells you what I nearly said requirements, but it's non-statutory, what the suggestions are for what you might do in your school. And it comes up with these ideas, which are key features of excellent provision, which last week, when I was at a conference about the National Plan for Music Education, our delegates tore apart on the basis that this isn't a list of features of excellent provision, it's a list of activities that you could do in a school. And you could do all of these things and your provision could still not be excellent, because you could be doing them all badly, and you could have excellent provision without doing lots of these things. So it's a kind of misnamed list, I think. However, what they're suggesting that schools should aim for is, again, we've got that 1 hour a week of timetabled music, so reiterating that expectation from the model music curriculum. Access to lessons across a range of instruments and voice, a school choir or vocal ensemble, a school ensemble or band of some description, space for rehearsals and individual practice. I do have a little giggle here, because I think at this point, whoever wrote this list forgot that primary schools aren't the same as secondary schools. And in a secondary school, Absolutely, you want space for rehearsals and individual practice. In a primary school, you can't send a child to do individual practice. An adult has to be with them. So it's absolutely pointless having an individual practice room. So if you've been reading this list and going, how am I going to do that? We haven't got the space, we haven't got the time. Don't worry, because you're not allowed to do it anyway. So just ignore that bit. A termly school performance, again, what does that really mean? I think it just means every child is performing at least once a term, and that might be singing in assembly when they do their class assembly, or, you know, in the nativity, or, you know, a bit of a concert. I don't think it has to be, I am doing 3 full-length performances, you know, a year. Just taking the opportunity to make sure that all children have done some sort of singing or playing at some point each term. And the other one that makes me giggle is the opportunity to enjoy live performances at least once a year, because it makes me wonder what happens to the children who don't enjoy it. It's like, do they have to sit behind and watch it again until they do enjoy it? I get what they mean, but it just tickles me. So that, as I say, is the suggestions from the National Plan for what schools should be working towards. But they are very woolly. Again, at this conference last week, some delegates were saying, well, access to lessons across a range of instruments of voice. Well, our Music Hub provide all the instruments of voice, so we can just say to the children, you could learn any instrument, and then we can tick that off. So, you know, each their own. Interpret it how you want to, but good to be aware that, you know, this is one of the key messages that they're trying to send out to schools in this document. And the other responsibilities, because of course it's non-statutory, so they can't tell you what to do, but let's say you're going to adopt this approach, your responsibility as a school would be that they're expecting to see a designated music lead. They have also said that schools should think about providing time for that role. No money, TNR points or anything like that, but they have said schools should consider that this is going to be a, you know, an additional role. Most schools, in fact all schools, are obliged to have someone in charge of every subject, so all schools will already have this in place, but they've also suggested, if you're part of a multi-academy trust, that there should be a trust-wide music lead as well. That your school should have a music development plan, which you should implement from autumn 2023. And that, again, if you're in a multi-academy trust, sitting over the top of that, you would want to have a trust music development plan as well, again, from autumn 2023. And what the document suggests is that your music development plan should help you to critically engage with your music offer. Well, if you are a music subject leader, you will doubtless have been made to write a development plan for your subject anyway, so you will be aware that that is a good way to critically engage with your music offer. They've suggested that you can link to wider school improvements, which is definitely something that I would always advocate for with music. Any way you can link it to the other stuff that's going on at school means it's more likely to get done. Help you to open a dialogue with your music hub. Of course, at the moment, we don't know who your music hub will be because everybody is rebidding. And it will help you to publicise your offer to pupils and parents, which it doesn't explicitly state this, but I assume that what they're imagining is that you're going to publish this development plan on your website page in the same way as you do your curriculum for music. So there's a fair few things that they are expecting. I would say my advice personally would be, if you have already got a development plan that you're happy with and you're working towards specific goals that you're happy with, just have that as your development plan. Don't feel the need to shoehorn all the other stuff in unless it's going to do something for your pupils and for your school community. You don't need to have a school ensemble unless it's going to provide an extra learning opportunity that is going to be meaningful and useful. You don't have to have a termly performance if it's not going to fit with all the other things that you're aiming to do. So try not to get dragged away from what you've decided is best for music in your school, because you're the expert at the end of the day in your school, just for the sake of shoehorning in the stuff from this document, because I'm going to say it again, it is non-statutory, so you can do what you like. Okay, so we're done with documents now. We're going to talk a little bit about just some kind of top tips, I guess, hints and tips for developing music in your school. So where I would start, and this time of year, it's always really interesting because there's obviously always loads of new people who've just been given the responsibility for music. And if you're in any of the Facebook groups for music or on any of the chats, you will see posts popping up this time of year. I've just inherited music. Oh my God, I don't know where to start. And where you start is with your vision or your intent, if you want to use Ofsted terminology. The most important thing is to establish why you are doing music in the first place. Before you look at resources, before you think about your curriculum, before you try and implement the national plan, why is it that you're doing music in the first place? And that might be you just want to give your children experiences that you know they won't get anywhere else. It might be that you want to make all of your children believe that they can be musicians. It might be that you want to just fulfill your statutory obligations. It could be any of those things. It could be any other things. It could be a mixture of those things. But you need to nail down what it is that you want in your school or what you want of music in your school. And then you need to think about what children will be able to do as a result of that. So when children leave you, which for most primary schools is going to be year 6, or most children in primary schools, what do you want them to be able to do when they leave you? And how does that relate back to your vision? And maybe you need to tweak that. Maybe you need to tweak your expectations. Maybe you need to tweak your vision. And when you've got that, that gives you the kind of beginning point and the end point for, dare I say it, your music development plan or your thought process around how you're going to actually structure your provision and what content you're going to use. So you know what music's for, why you're doing it, you know what you want the children to go away from you being able to do. And then you need to work out how you get from one to the other. So you will need to audit your current provision. You'll need to identify areas for development. And you could do that in a number of ways. You could do a survey, a staff survey, to find out, you know, what staff would like help with, or what areas of the curriculum they're most worried about. You could do a pupil focus group to ask them what they like about music, what they like to do more of, what they like to do less of. You could do observations of teaching staff if you can convince them that that's not a terrifying prospect. You could scrutinize assessment evidence. You can look at the curriculum that you've been using. Whatever you need to do to work out how far away you are from achieving that vision and those outcomes for your pupils. I'm assuming the majority of people here are subject leaders, because that's how it tends to work. But if you are a subject leader, you need to develop your own knowledge as well as finding out what your teachers need to be confident to deliver, because you need to have a sort of greater level of expertise than they do. Otherwise, you can't really lead them in the way that you would need to. And then I would say at that point, you can start the process of cherry picking from the key documents we've looked at today. So this is my vision. This is what we want the children to get out of it. These are the areas where we need to start working. So, we could bring that idea in from the national plan, or we could bring in the listening list from the model music curriculum, or we could bring in music development matters in the early years, or we could adopt Ofsted's idea of those 3 different pillars. All of those, any of those, none of those, because it's all non-statutory. So do whatever works for you. And then you can create a plan for how you're going to achieve that vision. So that's your kind of implementation, if you like, if you like that Ofsted terminology. So you've got your vision, you know where you're going, you know where you are now, and you know what to do in order to get there. Which brings us seamlessly into this lovely advert for my book, which does exactly that. Basically, it goes through that idea of vision mapping, for want of a better word, ideas for staff development, lots of information about musical development as well in there, extracurricular activities, curriculum design ideas for assessment and performances, So if you haven't seen that book yet, you can buy it on Amazon or indeed on pretty much any online retailer. Sadly, if you go into Waterstones, look for it. It won't be there because I'm not that important. But they do have it online with Waterstones. But most people obviously have Amazon accounts, so that might be the quickest way of getting that through to you. I would be delighted if you wanted to read it. It's I feel like it's got all of the information from my brain from the last 20 years down in one book. And people keep going, when are you going to write another book? And I'm like, I'm empty now. That's it. There's nothing left. So if you want an insight into the contents of my brain, buy this book. I realise I may have